the next half an hour, we shall sift through the sands of history and pick out those moments of truth, of triumph, of hate and upheaval that were broadcast live into our drawing rooms, chronicling history.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Someone you know well.
It all began from here. I'm watching the first live broadcast being beamed out of the BBC's Alexandria studios in 1936, an event that would give us a ringside view of history as it would unfold.
On the 2nd of November 1936, the BBC television broadcast its first show in a high-definition format.
This is direct television from the studios at Alexandra Palace.
And for the next 2 decades, BBC dominated the television broadcast arena. It also marked the beginning of the era of television broadcasting for both information and entertainment to a wider audience that had previously been used to the radio. Television broadcasting ushered in an era of dynamism into the media business like never before, and continues to engage audiences.
For the Wright brothers, this airplane that flew for just 12 seconds might have been quite literally a flight of fancy, but it transformed the way human beings would travel in the years to come.
On December 17, 1903, the Wright brothers boarded a self-designed powered airplane, crafting a fresh page in aviation history, recording the first flight, a flight that lasted a mere 12 seconds. But 12 seconds was time enough to change the world forever and set in motion both innovation and aviation design for generations to come. Innovation that in 1969 would give the world the Big Bird, the Concorde, an aircraft that defied both speed and sound. The Concorde, built jointly by the British and French, completed its first supersonic flight on the 1st of October 1969, reaching 10,000 feet at a speed of 480 kilometers an hour. The aircraft would graduate to eventually fly at a speed of 2,080 kilometers, making it possible to fly over the Atlantic within 3.5 hours, less than half the time other aircraft usually take. Nearly 3 decades later, French aviation design continues to dazzle. The launch of the Airbus A380 that will start commercial operations in 2007 is proof enough. The A380s have 50% more floor space than its closest competitor and can seat up to a maximum of 853 passengers. The A380 has a maximum range of 15,000 kilometers and a cruising speed of about 900 kilometers an hour, making it the new gold standard in aviation technology and design.
The ruthless Japanese decimation of Pearl Harbor may have seemed like a monumental victory in the battle for Southeast Asia, but it turned out, in fact, to be really the biggest tactical blunder that cost the Japanese the Second World War.
Even as Japan and the United States continue to negotiate over Japanese annexation of northern China, on the 7th of December 1941, Japanese bombers rained down on the American naval base of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. A sortie of over 150 planes pounded the base for over 30 minutes. Less than an hour later, at least another 100 aircraft bombed the base again. Within 2 hours, 2,400 American soldiers, 1,178 civilians were dead. 6 battleships had been sunk, another 112 vessels sunk or damaged, 164 aircraft destroyed. America reacted with outrage, declaring war on Japan, becoming a key force among the Allies in the Second World War.
The carcass of this building is a mute testament to the nuclear winter stoked by the dropping of the atom bombs that acquainted man with the dark side of one of his greatest achievements, splitting the atom.
The first nuclear explosion took place on July 9, 1945 in New Mexico in the United States. The explosion, nicknamed the Trinity, was part of an experiment, the full impact of which could not be assessed without a full-scale test. But it wasn't until a few months later that the world would finally know the full impact of this technology. The 6th of August 1945, 8:15 local time, an American B-52 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima in Japan, destroying more than 60% of the city. The bomb, referred to as the Little Boy after President Roosevelt, killed over 140,000. 3 days later, another bomb fell on Nagasaki. This time, it was a bigger bomb. The Fat Man, as it was called after the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, killed over 74,000 people. The nuclear explosions left scores disabled, an impact of radiation. The two atomic bombs left the Japanese with little choice. On the 14th of August 1945, they surrendered to the Allies, bringing an end to the World War II.
An unsurpassed feat of human engineering, the Titanic became a floating sarcophagus in the icy waters of the North Atlantic, perhaps a sobering reminder of the limits of human technological innovation.
It was 10th of April 1912. 2,227 passengers, mostly poor immigrants, but some rich and famous, boarded the most luxurious liner of its time, the Titanic. Setting sail on its maiden voyage that was to take them from Queenstown in Ireland to New York in the New World. But on the fateful night of April the 14th, the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank within 3 hours. Only 705 passengers on board survived, making it one of the worst maritime disasters of all time. The ship was lost to memory till when in 1985 it was found on the ocean floor, split in two, spread over half a mile off the coast of Newfoundland.
British troops beat the retreat, signaling the victory of India's freedom struggle and ushering in a new dawn.
Bombay, and a moving ceremony of farewell to the 1st Battalion, the Somerset Light Infantry, the last British unit to leave the Indian Dominion. After an exchange of gifts and flags, the troops marched through the massive gateway of India and down to the quay side. Nurses and WVS workers shared in the send-off and are now due for an equally stirring welcome home.
Indian independence, the 15th of August 1947, as the British Union Jack went down and the Indian tricolour rose in its place on the ramparts of the Red Fort in Delhi.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
It was indeed a tryst with destiny, as the empire had given back the jewel in its crown. India to its people who had won their freedom using the weapons of satyagraha and non-cooperation, rather than restoring to violence and bloodshed. Ironically, violence followed independence. Even as the British left India, the newly independent nation grappled with the worst communal violence known in the subcontinent. as a result of the country being divided into India and Pakistan. The forced migration that followed partition left a trail of rioting and blood, with more than a few 100,000 dead in its aftermath.
A single shot to the neck snuffs out the life of one of America's most promising presidents. The assassination escalated the Vietnam War.
Dallas, Texas. The morning of November 22, 1923, saw crowds line up on Dealey Avenue as President Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline made their way through the streets in their presidential motorcade. President Kennedy was on his way to address the Dallas Trade Mart, but it was not to be. At 11:30 a.m., shots were heard. President Kennedy had been shot at. He lay critically wounded, straddled in his wife's lap as they rushed him to Parkland Hospital, where he was pronounced dead.
I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do.
Shortly after, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested at a movie theater for killing a Dallas police officer and assassinating the president. But when he was taken into custody, Oswald denied having assassinated the president and said he had been a mere patsy.
Edmund Hillary and Tenzin Norgay on top of the world after scaling Mount Everest, a feat that sets a new benchmark for human endeavor.
It was a triumph for the human spirit as New Zealander Edmund Hillary and his teammate Tenzin Norgay made it to the top of the world, successfully climbing Mount Everest at 29,028 feet above sea level on the 29th of May 1953. But they managed to stay at the summit for a mere 15 minutes, since they were low on oxygen. Sir Hillary went on to conquer other frontiers, leading a successful mission to the white continent of Antarctica in 1958, making him the first overland explorer to do so since Robert Scott's expedition in 1912. Hillary made his polar conquest in 80 days, traversing almost 1,900 kilometers in extreme weather conditions.
One man's struggle against racism would bring humanity face to face with the extent of its moral bankruptcy. The sheer moral force of Mandela's movement forced mankind to work to eradicate discrimination by passing an unprecedented slew of legislation guaranteeing the right to equality.
They face segregation in their own country, segregated purely based on the color of their skin. The White Afrikaner National Party institutionalized discrimination in South Africa in 1948. And for the next 4 decades, the people of South Africa were forced to wage a war. Wage a war in their own country for not being born white, the color of their colonizers. Nelson Mandela was their leader.
I have spoken about freedom in my lifetime. Your struggle, your commitment, and your discipline has released me to stand before you today.
The strongest voice of protest against the injustice and brutality of apartheid.
Africa! Haibuye! Amandla!
Mandela was arrested in 1962 until 1990, when he was released, was the spirit behind the movement of resistance and protest. In 1990, he was set free and went on to become the first black president of South Africa in 1994.
The pace at which we move
As the towers of the free world came crashing down, the world woke to the threat posed by a new cancer, that of terrorism.
No one in the world could have imagined this. The perversity of this act of terror has changed the world forever. The fall of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Manhattan on the 11th of September 2001 marked the beginning of a new chapter in world history. America has not been the same. The world none the wiser. The threat of terrorism today is part of our subconscious. The word suicide bomber part of our daily vocabulary. And security a global concern. On the 13th of December 2001, terror struck the most powerful edifice of Indian democracy. The Parliament building in New Delhi. A group of armed gunmen attacked the premises while Parliament was still in session. 12 people were killed, 22 injured in the confrontation that followed. 4 years later, little seems to have changed, when on 7th of July 2005, 3 bombs went off on London's commuter lifeline, the London Underground, and one bus nearby, killing 52 innocent people, disrupting normal life, and reminding the world that it's never truly prepared to cope with the menace of terrorism.
The end of one of the most brutal dictatorships in human history is signaled by this iconic image of a tank rolling past a Saddam sculpture in the heart of Baghdad.
The US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 was, as President Bush reasoned, to unearth the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had built. Also, it was to give Iraqi people freedom from a brutal dictator. But Iraq was not prepared for the military arsenal that America and its allies unleashed on Saddam's Iraqi army and the country. It was not a battle of equals. Soon enough, Baghdad fell to the US and its allies.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
The victorious troops brought down what was one of the most obvious monuments of the dictator's regime. But the battle did not end, even with Saddam captured, sentenced, and now executed. Even now, millions of helpless Iraqis are forced into being witnesses and victims of the horrors of military conflict.